Gilbert Brule was drafted 6th overall in 2005. For most of his draft year, scouts had him second in the class, behind Crosby and ahead of everyone else. 8 years later, Phoenix tried sending him to the minors, and he told the GM he'd rather become a firefighter. Before the Bantam draft, before the standing ovations at Vancouver Giants games, before any scout wrote his name on a ranking sheet, Gilbert Brule was a kid in North Vancouver with an older sister named Leah who had been born with cerebral palsy. She spent most of her life in a wheelchair, and the weight of her care eventually fractured the household around her. The family had moved from Edmonton to be closer to the support she needed, and the parents divorced not long after. Which means the first important thing you need to know about Gilbert Brule is that the people closest to him were already coming apart before he ever laced up a skate competitively. Leah died on December 1st, 1996, from complications related to her condition. She was 12 years old. Gilbert was 9. He would later tattoo her name on his left wrist, and he's carried it there through every game and every country and every phase of what came next. This does not get treated here as a motivation device because that's the kind of shortcut that flattens real life into a sports movie. What it does explain is the foundation under the player who showed up in junior hockey a few years later and played with an intensity that looked, from the outside, like fearlessness. When people described the way Brule competed, they kept reaching for words that suggested he had nothing to protect, that every shift carried a willingness to absorb punishment that most teenagers instinctively avoided. That willingness had a source, and the source was not hockey. By the time he entered the WHL Bantam draft in 2002, the Vancouver Giants had traded up to select him 1st overall, and the production that followed justified the pick immediately. He won WHL Rookie of the Year in 2004 after putting up 60 points in 67 games, which was the first time a Giants player had ever taken home a Major League award. The following season, he finished 3rd in WHL scoring with 87 points, was named CHL Scholastic Player of the Year, and recorded the first hat trick in the history of the CHL Top Prospects game.
Ryan Parent, great pass, Brule going to the net, Brule scores! Gilbert Brule makes no mistake.
By the time the 2005 draft arrived, the scouting consensus had narrowed the class down to 2 tiers. Sidney Crosby and then Gilbert Brule. He was listed at 5 feet 10. He played like the scouting report was something that happened to other people. Physical, relentless, gifted with his hands. The kind of player who treated contact as a weapon rather than a risk. And that combination of size and aggression and skill made evaluators believe they were watching a franchise center who simply hadn't finished growing yet. The instinct to throw himself into every collision without reservation looked, at that point in his life, like an asset. Nobody had any reason to wonder what it would cost him later. The thing about playing like you have nothing to lose is that it works, right up until it costs you something that you can't afford to give. The Columbus Blue Jackets in the fall of 2005 were not an organization equipped to develop an 18-year-old prospect carefully. They were a struggling franchise that needed talent on the ice immediately, and so they rushed Brule into the NHL the way rebuilding teams often do with high picks, hoping the ability would outrun the circumstance. It did not. In Game 2 of his career, the home opener on October 7th against the Calgary Flames, a hit from defenseman Roman Hamrlik fractured his sternum and knocked him out for 17 games. He had 1 assist to his name and a fractured sternum, and he was still months away from his 19th birthday. He came back. That part matters because the pattern that defined his time in Columbus wasn't a single catastrophic injury, but a sequence of them that stacked on top of one another without enough recovery in between. A broken right leg followed the sternum fracture later that same rookie season and cost him another month. Then came a knee problem, then a high ankle sprain. Then there were abdominal issues that lingered and resisted easy diagnosis. None of these injuries, taken individually, was career-ending, but the cumulative effect was something far worse than any single break, because each one eroded a different layer on the foundation he needed to build on. The momentum vanished, then the confidence, and eventually the basic trust that his body would do what he asked it to do. Columbus moved him to Edmonton in the summer of 2008 in a trade for Rafi Torres, and the geography alone carried a kind of narrative weight. Brule had been born in Edmonton before his family moved west, and now here he was, back in the city where his life had started, wearing the jersey of a franchise that desperately needed him to become what the scouting reports had promised. Pat Quinn, who was coaching the Oilers that season, gave him real minutes and trusted him with meaningful ice time. And the 2009-10 season became the year everything appeared to click. 17 goals, 37 points, 65 games. Those numbers were good enough to rank second on the team in goals and third in overall scoring, and they earned him a 2-year contract that felt like the beginning of a second chapter rather than the end of a long audition. For a stretch, it looked like the story had corrected itself. The injuries had taken years from him, but the talent had survived. And then came a moment that had nothing to do with hockey at all, and it remains the single most widely known episode of his entire life. On May 31st, 2011, Brule and his girlfriend Kelsey Nichols were driving through West Vancouver on their way to a park to walk their German Shepherd. It was raining, and two figures were standing on the side of the road trying to wave down a ride. Nichols did not want to stop. Brule was certain one of them was Bono, certain enough that he convinced her to turn the car around and pull over. And when they did, it was, in fact, the lead singer of U2 and his assistant who had gone out for a walk near the West Vancouver Yacht Club and got caught in a downpour with no way back. They drove Bono and his assistant to the Horseshoe Bay Ferry Terminal, a 5 to 10 minute ride during which the back seat was shared between the rock star and the couple's German Shepherd. In return, Bono offered backstage passes to the U2 concert the following night in Edmonton, and Brule flew to Edmonton the next day. During the show, Bono told the crowd the story and then delivered a line that landed as one of the more surreal sentences ever spoken at a concert in that city. "I'm so grateful, I've decided I want to be Gilbert Brule." He cast his bandmates as Edmonton Oilers legends, calling The Edge the Great One of U2, and for about a week, Gilbert Brule was the most famous hockey player on the planet for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with the sport. That week felt like the punctuation on something good. The career was moving, the name was finally in the public conversation, and the story finally had the kind of momentum that suggested the worst was behind him. So the question that hangs over everything that followed is a simple one. Why did it keep going in the wrong direction? The answer was never on the ice. The answer was in a relationship that had been deteriorating for years between Gilbert and his father Chris, who had been managing his son's finances since the beginning of his professional career. This is not an unusual arrangement in hockey. Young players routinely hand the financial side of their lives to a parent or a family member, and the NHLPA has never implemented the kind of oversight framework that would protect a 19-year-old from the people he trusts most. Brule would later come to believe that his father had been taking his money. Chris Brule has disputed the allegations publicly and denied any misappropriation, and the specifics of what happened between them have never been resolved in a courtroom or a formal proceeding. What is not disputed by either side is that the relationship broke down completely, to the point where father and son communicated only by email, and that the fallout left Gilbert in a place that required medication and professional help for depression. This is not incidental to the hockey story. This is the hockey story. The depression, the medications, the fractured confidence that comes from believing the person who raised you and put you on the ice in the first place was the same person hollowing out your financial future while you were busy trying to earn it back. All of that explains why a player who had just posted a 17-goal season couldn't build on it. The 2009-10 numbers were not a floor that the rest of his career would be built on. They were a ceiling, constructed over a foundation that was already cracking in places nobody could see from the press box. The league produces teenagers every year, hands them contracts worth millions of dollars, and produces almost no structural support around financial literacy or oversight of the people managing their money. Brule is far from the only player who walked away from a professional career with significantly less than he earned. But most of those stories never get told because the players carry the shame of it, and the league has no institutional interest in advertising the gap. The broken bones from Columbus healed. What his father's betrayal cost him did not heal on any comparable timeline, and the league had no mechanism to catch it. The version of Gilbert Brule who showed up for the rest of his NHL career was a player whose talent remained visible and whose capacity to perform at the level that talent demanded had been quietly gutted from the inside. When Phoenix tried to send him to Portland of the AHL in December 2013, he refused to report. General manager Don Maloney told reporters afterward that the conversation had been straightforward. Brule said he was done with professional hockey and was thinking about becoming a firefighter instead. The Coyotes suspended him, warned that they would terminate his contract unless he changed his mind quickly, and when he didn't, they released him in early January. The hockey world absorbed this information with the enthusiasm it reserves for players who no longer matter to the standings. 299 NHL games, 95 points, not a single headline on the way out. What the hockey world missed, because it was no longer paying attention, is that Gilbert Brule did not actually stop playing hockey. He moved to the KHL and spent 6 seasons playing professionally across Russia, Croatia, and China. He finished his playing career in 2021 with Unia Oświęcim in Poland, which means he played professional hockey for 7 years after the NHL decided it was finished with him, in leagues and cities that most North American fans couldn't locate on a map. And in February 2018, 12 years after a broken leg had cost him the chance to represent Canada at the World Junior Championship in Vancouver, Gilbert Brule put on a Team Canada jersey at the Pyeongchang Olympics. He scored a goal in the semifinal against Germany, and minutes later, threw a check to the head of David Wolf that ended his tournament. A 5-minute major, a game misconduct, and a suspension that kept him off the ice for the bronze medal game. Canada won bronze without him. That is the full version of the moment. And it's more complicated than the version most people would choose to tell. But it's also the version that sounds the most like Gilbert Brule, a player who could never separate the brilliance from the cost. The thing that had been taken from him as a teenager was handed back to him at 31, on the other side of the world from the rink where his junior career began, and even then it came with a mark on it. After he retired from playing, he didn't disappear. He settled on the Sunshine Coast in British Columbia, founded an operation called Brule Hockey, and became a skills coach working with young players in the same province where he grew up. In 2024, he was hired as the skills coach for the Coastal Tsunami, a new franchise in the Pacific Junior Hockey League based out of Gibsons, BC. The 6th overall pick, who was projected to anchor an NHL franchise for a decade, is now teaching teenagers how to compete at that level that gives them a chance at the life he was supposed to have, in the same province where Leah was buried, in a community that knows him as a coach rather than a cautionary tale. That is not a diminished life. That's a different one. The firefighter thing never happened. What happened instead was a bronze medal, a decade of professional hockey that the NHL never bothered to track, and a coaching career built on the decision to stay close to the game rather than walk away from it entirely. His father put him on the ice as a child. He ended his career putting other people's children on the ice in British Columbia long after that relationship was gone. Some things survive what breaks them. The NHL measures careers in games played, points scored, and contracts signed. By those numbers, Gilbert Brule underperformed. By almost every other measure, what he survived, what he built afterward, what he went back and won when nobody in North America was watching, the math looks completely different. If you're not subscribed yet, now is the time, because these are not the kind of stories you've already heard the easy way. And if this kind of story is why you're here, joining our membership is how you go deeper. Links are below. Next time, we look at a player whose name you definitely know, whose story you definitely do not, and the part of it that still has not been told.